We're going to get there, I promise. Before we start, I want to thank the groups here who helped put this on today. Braver Angels, the Washington State Debate Coalition, the League of Women Voters Kitsap, and the Jackson Foundation. If you join me in applause real quick. What I think you're going to see is an interesting concept, and this is different. I've moderated debates for years through the Sun, through our editorial board, and this one's different because of how Braver Angels work, and I think that's really interesting, and so I was glad to get to be a part of it and get to see how it works. The Braver Angels community questions model uses a ranked choice ballot to poll the public on the 4 most pressing issues facing the community. Sourcing from the top issues on the poll from members across the district, we then gathered equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats and asked them to make sense of the findings. In a 2-hour moderated conversation that took place 1 week ago Thursday, these folks, they spent the time talking about each issue, what exactly it meant to them, because the topics themselves are a bit broad. And what you're going to hear today, when I read questions, it's presenting what came out of that conversation. So these are not the questions that I came up with. These were the questions that a group of people sat and talked through. And I listened. I was there. I was listening. Justin from Braver Angels was listening. Aaron also with that group. And so there were some people listening and then formulating from those notes what people were concerned about and how they interpreted each of those topics. So I want you to understand that. I think it's an interesting way to do debates. We have some ground rules today. Each candidate is going to have 90 seconds to introduce himself. And then for each question, each candidate has 60 seconds. The first candidate has 60 seconds. The other candidate has 45 seconds as a rebuttal. We flipped a coin just now in the back, and so that determined the order in which you'll see people be asked the questions. And so the candidates are aware of who goes first and why they each go first. I'm going to ask Elizabeth Dahl to step forward real quick. Elizabeth is the Director of Politics with Braver Angels, and she's going to give you just one more word for the audience.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Dahl. I'm the Director of Braver Politics at Braver Angels. And I just wanted to introduce first the ground rules that the candidates will be following for this debate, which are numbered 1, avoid using Democrats and Republicans, except in reference to actions taken by public officials within a specific government body. 2, cite your sources. 3, direct criticism at actions rather than intentions. And 4, avoid stereotypes, jargon, and platitudes. And then secondly, I wanted to let the audience all know you're here to observe and learn from the candidates to gain a better understanding of local issues and not to loudly support one side or oppose another. Please keep comments to yourselves. Be seen, not heard. Also, silence your cell phones if you have not done so already. We really want to make sure that the candidates are heard and that they're able to focus and thoroughly share their thoughts. And we would really hate for them to be interrupted by a cell phone. And finally, at the end, we will, anyone making significant noise or comment, we'll calmly come, someone will find you and we'll ask you to just step outside into the lobby. And then at the end, we'll ask you to pull your phones back out and we'll show you a QR code, pass out a QR code for you to tell us what you thought of this debate format. We are still learning and we want to hear from you what you thought of this debate and also how we can improve moving forward. Thank you.
Actually, 2 more thank yous before we start. One of them, I didn't even say this. Gosh, I'll twist around. The 6 people that took part in this, I know some of them are in the audience today. I don't see all of them, so I'm not going to make you stand up, but give them a round of applause. They're going to hear you. And then the last thank you is for you 2 guys. I say this, I've been saying this for years every time we do editorial board interviews, but I know this is not easy. What you do. This is a lot of time that you spend, and no matter what anyone thinks of your politics or what you do when you're down in Olympia, it's a lot of work, and we know that, and I thank you for taking the time to do it. So to start, Representative Young, if you would like to give us a 90-second introduction. And one more thing. Carol from the League of Women Voters Kitsap is right at my side here. And Carol's our timekeeper, and she's going to be strict on the timekeeper. She will hold up a sign at 15 seconds and then a stop at the stop sign. So we'll try to stick to those as closely as we can. Go ahead.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm State Representative Jesse Young. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for coming. I had a unique opportunity when I left my home to come here today. As I was coming down the stairs, something caught my ear, and it was my 3-year-old son laughing and playing in the background. And you're probably familiar with that type of laughter, the type that doesn't know fear, has never been encumbered with any type of real pain in their life. And it's just a joyous laughter. I didn't know a lot of that when I was growing up as a child, a homeless kid on the streets of Hilltop in Tacoma. And so I worked really hard, had a lot of providence in my life, and rose up out of that poverty and worked tirelessly to make sure that my family would never know the homelessness that I grew up with, would never taste what it feels like to actually be hungry or to not know where you're going to lay your head at night. And when I chose to come into politics, it was derived from the notion that maybe I could offer my skill set to not only do that for my family, but to also provide that skill and hard work for you so that you might, and your children might never know that type of fear. And so I made a bunch of promises when I came in as your state representative 9 years ago. I made a promise that I would be bipartisan and that I would work for you. And that's why I'm now choosing to run for state senate, because I believe the levers over there will allow me to continue to fight for you every day. Thank you.
Senator Randall, 90 seconds to you.
Thank you all so much. I really am truly grateful for the outpouring of participation that we have in our legislative district. It's important that each of our neighbors have a voice, use their vote to make a decision about the kind of leadership that you all want for the next 4 years. I'm grateful that this district chose me to serve as your senator 4 years ago. I grew up in this community, and the values of this community have really influenced my work in the legislature. I bring with me the stories of my grandparents who chose Kitsap to raise their families, a welcoming community, who chose this place to find economic opportunity for their children and themselves, grandparents who served in the fire department and the Department of Defense, and teachers and educators who instilled in me a desire to give back, to open doorways for folks wider. And it's my experience as a first-generation college graduate who had to go across the country to afford education that would open the doorway for me that makes me fight so hard for educational opportunity for our young people. It's a story of my sister who had complex disabilities that has fueled my desire to fight for universal health care and for Medicaid expansion for new moms. It's your stories every day that I bring with me to Olympia, and I will continue to do so.
Okay, the candidates are aware of this, but the audience isn't, so I'm going to say it real quick. The 4 topics, the issues that the survey identified were inflation, crime, democracy, and the environment. And so for each of those issues, our group talked about it and identified 2 questions. So there'll be 2 questions for each of those issues. And the one we're going to start with is inflation. Respondents to the Braver Angels survey named inflation as the #1 concern on a list of issues facing state residents. With the acknowledgement that inflation is an economic phenomenon that goes beyond the boundaries of just the legislative district and even the state, we are still interested in how you would address the concern residents have about the rising cost of living. Senator Randall, you get the first question. What is one immediate, specific form of relief or benefit that you would support the state legislator enacting in the upcoming session to help constituents absorb the rising cost of living? How would a proposal that includes financial relief be paid for?
Thank you for this question. I always find it very difficult for us to choose one thing that we can do. The work of the legislature is complicated and nuanced, and we need a lot of solutions to make sure that we're providing the support that families need to thrive. One of the policies that we've already passed and just finally funded this year is the Working Families Tax Credit that helps to flip our upside down tax code that puts a higher amount of pressure on the lowest income Washingtonians, and continuing to expand programs like that are incredibly important. I'm excited to see the difference that it makes for individual families. I know we have to do more to train folks for good jobs and strong futures, and that's why I work so hard in healthcare. But I think making sure that families can afford to pay their bills, to not choose between medication and utilities is so essential.
Thank you. Representative Young, 45 seconds to respond.
Yeah, that is actually quite simple. I would move to immediately repeal the impending 45-cent, 46-cent per gallon gas tax that's coming in January. Our working class families should not have to absorb that. Coming from low income, I can tell you what it's like to watch your parent stare at a $5 bill and wonder if that's enough money to put gas in the car to get you to the store and back just to feed your kids. We should never put that type of tax burden on a struggling working class economy when the economy is taking the inflationary hit that it is right now. So I would move to immediately do that. I would also move to immediately repeal about 15% of the 68 new taxes that were passed by the majority party and my opponent in her first term.
We will take some latitude at times with some follow-ups if I could. So I'd actually be curious if Senator Randall would you agree with the tax, with the gas tax specifically?
So what my opponent is talking about isn't the gas tax in the way that we've ever levied a gas tax before. What he's talking about, that I know we'll talk more about when we get into the subject of the environment, is the cap and trade program. Cap and Invest, Washington's fee on the biggest polluters in the state, some of the strongest environmental legislation that any state has passed. Now, it's to be determined, it's projection, how much that will turn into dollars at the pump, cents at the pump. We've all been on a roller coaster this last few years, and certainly the last few weeks, to watch the gas prices rise and fall. And I agree, we need to do a lot of work to make sure that families can afford to get to work, to get to their school or doctor's appointments. But we also need to make sure that we're preserving our environment. I hear that loud and clear from neighbors, and that's why I voted for the Cap and Invest program.
I'll move to question 2 now. Question 2, and we'll let Representative Young start with this one, also on inflation. Looking further ahead with the acknowledgement that we don't know how long inflation will stay at its current rate, what is one idea you have to structurally reform either state tax policy or state government programs to ensure Washington state residents feel optimistic about their financial future?
Well, the first thing that I would do is I would immediately stand against all of the lobby effort that happens down in Olympia to put rules around how our money is spent. And the way that lobbying effort works is Seattle and all your major metropolitan areas put rules into effect that basically say you can only access the money that you're going to spend on these resources if you provide it in the way that they deliver it in Seattle. That never works for our rural communities like this. Unfortunately, the Democrat caucus is a majority caucus made up of Seattle King County legislators. And we need to stand against that for the rural delivery so that people out here can trust that the resources that we fund, that I've voted to fund for you, can actually be spent in a way that you will and your families will benefit from. And you have my commitment to always do that. Finally, I would note that on both of the previous 2 questions, she did not answer the question.
Initial question to you, Senator Randall.
Thank you. I think Representative Young makes a good point of needing to have a voice that will stand against Seattle politics. I think it is valuable to have that voice be in majority caucus leadership. As one of the few members of our leadership team who represents a district outside of Seattle, I get to bring the voices of our community into leadership conversations, into priority setting conversations, making sure that our caucus takes into account how policies will impact communities like ours and ours specifically. I've worked to break down barriers to increase access to my office for constituents, and I think that also leads to more trust.
I want to, this time I want to come back to you, Representative Young. Would you give me, when you say services provided in a different way to rural communities than they are provided in Seattle, what exactly, can you give me an example of that? What exactly does that mean?
The types, well, one of them is one of the bipartisan bills that was unanimously passed this year that I sponsored that dealt with giving tax incentives to more rural-based communities so that they have access to the money, because the conditionals on the tax incentive align something like this. Well, if you can only serve a certain demographic at a certain population density, then you can use the money. But Seattle is very dense. And so when they put those type of density conditionals on the release of money, it makes it extremely hard for a rural setting provider to meet that density conditional. And when they can't meet the density conditional, they can't have access to the money. So from a broad perspective, you see the state say, we're going to put millions of dollars into that into this bucket of money, but then the rural counties never get it. It all goes to Seattle. And she says that she's a voice in her majority caucus, but she has not done anything to affect that. All the money and all the budgets passed this session went to Seattle with those conditionals intact. We've discussed it. That has been made aware to all of the rural majority party members in this district, and they do nothing about it. I will fight to restore your access to that money because Seattle doesn't deserve your tax dollars.
Let me give 45 more seconds to that question. Talk about the rural Seattle issue from your perspective.
Sure. With my seat at the table, I worked hard last year to pass, for example, manufacturing tax incentive policy and a warehouse incentive policy. Previous policy only included tax credits to the biggest businesses in the state, to the largest warehouses, and inside of King County. And the policy I passed would have expanded that tax incentive to build more manufacturing facilities, more warehouse facilities here. Now, what I will say is the governor vetoed a large portion of that bill that had passed unanimously through the Senate, and I'm prepared to go back next legislative session to have a veto-proof majority override that veto.
Okay, we're gonna move on to crime now. Crime, like I mentioned, this was the number 2 issue selected on the survey, and crime was also chosen as a top concern by survey respondents, with the concept of public safety the focus of our panel's discussion. Please outline how will you address 3 potential issues facing the state legislature this coming session. The first question goes to Senator Randall. A 2021 state Supreme Court decision known as the Blake decision decriminalized the possession of small amounts of illegal drugs and vacated thousands of convictions for simple drug possession. How can the legislature address the situation so that individuals possessing and using drugs may still be held accountable when coming into contact with law enforcement and directed towards treatment programs or mental health evaluation?
Thank you. That's such an important question. So when the Supreme Court overturned all of the state's drug laws, it was in the middle of legislative session. Big policy like that is something we usually spend many months, at least, before legislative session working on, but we were set to scramble to figure out what policy we could get the votes to pass. So what we passed was a Band-Aid, frankly, a temporary 2-year policy that we knew we'd have to come back and fix. And I can tell you, it hasn't been working. I hear that from neighbors at the doors, and I freely admit it. We need to do something differently. We have some Blake work groups that are bringing proposals forward, but I think I've been in conversation with many of our law enforcement officers and our police chiefs and sheriffs, first responders. What we need is a little more power to push folks in to treatment to ensure that we're tracking across jurisdictions, none of which is happening right now. And I look forward to being at the table to make sure we get something across the finish line that addresses those needs.
Representative Young.
So I'm glad to hear Senator Randall admit that they didn't fix it. Unfortunately, we did have a bill to fix it. The Blake decision settled on the definition of a word. So I co-sponsored the bill. Actually, I prime sponsored the bill, had a number of co-sponsors on it that would have rechanged or redefined the definition so that we could have gone back to the law that was in place before the decision. Unfortunately, Senator Randall refused to co-sponsor that bill. As a result, we got a fix that we knew wasn't going to work. We could have gone back to what was, and then we could have worked to make things better. But instead, we got a radical new push that defunded our police, that handcuffed our police, kept these drugs legal, and now we're dealing with parents that are worried about their kids having drugs slung to them because you can't arrest a kid as long as they've got a size of fentanyl or cocaine that's considered a personal use. We need to go back to the original definition.
What was the definition? Explain that.
The definition had to deal with what they considered personal use. And it had, and so when they came in there, and there is national history on how that has always been interpreted. So our law was written many years ago under that national definition. The state Supreme Court came in and radically redefined that for the first time in our country's history.
Does the legislation try
And so
to
I
identify
wrote-
a
so-
amount?
So I wrote legislation that would clearly redefine what that word meant to that definition, and it would have fixed the solution outright. And then we could have started with where we were, that we knew worked, would have worked for all of our multi-layers of governments. All the distribution of money that we distribute would have gone back to a level starting place that wouldn't have put our kids at risk. And then we could have moved forward with additional solutions. The problem was, instead of going back to the starting point that we knew worked, that we knew protected our kids, the Democrat Party chose to go in a different direction. They used the Blake decision as a means to push a radical agenda, and now our kids are paying the price.
Give us 45 seconds back on that. Is that definition part of what you're trying to do, or are you doing something different?
So what the Supreme Court struck down was a definition of personal drug possession that didn't include the word knowing possession. That's what caused our drug statute to be overturned. Now, as Representative Young well knows, it's possible to introduce any bill you want, but it's not always possible to get the votes you need to pass it. We didn't have the votes to pass the version of the bill that he's talking about. I'm our majority whip in the Senate. I know where my colleagues stand on policy. I know where a lot of Representatives Young's colleagues stand on policy. We didn't have the votes to turn that policy back on in a way that would have overturned the Supreme Court's definition.
Okay. Will the votes be there this session?
So
It's a follow-up for her. I'll come back to you if you want another
yeah,
try.
the policy I think that we'll see will be a little bit different. What we're discussing right now is sort of a misdemeanor for first possession, gross misdemeanor second, more impetus to direct folks into treatment, which right now is often just optional. But what I need to add is that we can direct folks to treatment all we want. If we don't have enough treatment beds in enough parts of the state, then it doesn't do any good. Right now, a lot of folks are having to wait, weeks, months before they can get a bed, and that is not a way to stop addiction.
Well, I would just add, it's unfortunate, but it's just not true that the votes are not there. The votes were there. We had many votes on bills that she sponsored that came out of the Senate that they passed out of the House, and specifically with police pursuit on 5919 goes back to the Senate, and they had the votes there. And so what she did was she walked off the floor and took an unexcused absence to kill the bill because they don't want to pass it. That's public record, folks. And more importantly, I find it disingenuous. She says she wants to be a voice in that caucus to steer it more towards a perspective that will help our district, yet she keeps admitting that she doesn't do it. Folks, as my record as a Republican has has been to create the most bipartisan record in the state in voting. That's because I will stand publicly against policy that the Republican Party supports if it hurts my district. She's saying that she won't, and her record shows that she doesn't produce that. If you want to get these changes to protect your kids, you need to send somebody back that not only will vote against their party, but will use the bully pulpit and make the case for what is right. Thank you.
We're actually, my next question is about the police pursuit bill, so you can address what was brought up. We'll start with Representative Young this time. Recent police reform legislation made changes to actions officers and deputies are directed to take during responses, most notably provisions to end police tactics like chokeholds and curb law enforcement's latitude when encountering and pursuing suspects. The limits placed on vehicle pursuits in particular has led some residents to feel police aren't able to effectively respond to crime. What changes would you support in the legislature's coming debate over law enforcement's ability to pursue individuals suspected of a crime?
Well, I would immediately move to repeal the bill that prohibited pursuit. And that bill we had passed, I voted for it. Please.
Hold on. Let him finish, please. Let him finish.
That bill was 5919. And as I just noted, it passed off the Senate. Senator Randall was a sponsor of it. It came to the House. We passed it off bipartisanly, sent it back over. And with 2 days left to go in session, after our county sheriffs, after our police, chiefs of police in this district begged all of us, please pass this bill so we can protect people again. She took, for the first time I've ever seen in my 10 years nearly in the legislature, an unexcused absence. Folks, you're allowed absences if you're sick. You're allowed absences if there's an emergency. She took an unexcused absence on her own bill with 2 days left in session and walked off the floor of the Senate to kill the bill that had the votes. When we needed her most, she walked away. I will never walk away from you.
Go ahead, 45 seconds.
Sure. I'm proud to be endorsed by our Kitsap County Sheriff, John Giese, and I've worked with law enforcement and been on countless ride-alongs for hours, trying to best understand what the tools are that we need to address rising crime, the same rising crime that we're seeing nationwide. It's not unique to Washington State. I do think we need to make sure that law enforcement has tools to pursue folks who are committing violent crimes, who are dangerous. The reason that I voted for the first repeal of high-speed chases was because the data shows us that more often than not, they lead to bystander death, like the deaths of 2 of my colleagues' parents who died in a police car chase as bystanders. We have more to do, and I've been talking to the Fraternal Order Police and to sheriffs and officers about what the right solution is, and maybe it is reinstating the police pursuits. But what I will say is, I know he's going to accuse me of lying, but the votes did not exist in our caucus. We had a very difficult caucus discussion inside chambers, and they just weren't there to get it across the finish line.
Can you respond to the statement that you weren't available to make a vote?
Sure. What he's talking about is also not a regular bill passage. It's not like a bill that's pulled up to the floor in order on a calendar order. What Representative Young is talking about is a 9th order motion, which is where the minority party tries to take over the floor and force their own agenda. I don't believe that we should give the power of floor leader to the minority caucus's floor leader. I don't believe that that is the way that we should perform our duties in the legislature. There are orders to things, and taking over the floor of the Senate is not something that I believe is good public policy.
Okay, we're going to move on. Did you want to make a last statement?
I do.
I'll give you one
Because
more.
but she is admitting it's true that she took an unexcused absence. An unexcused absence that her leadership gave her because they didn't agree with her maneuver. Otherwise, they would have walked off the floor. The fact is she walked off the floor, killed the bill that she and enough members of the Democrat Senate caucus sponsored and had already voted for, and killed the bill. Now, I'll note, she keeps noting that Democrat Sheriff John Giese gave her an endorsement, but what she didn't note is that she has none of the endorsements from the major police unions in the state. That's because the FOP and WACOPS have all endorsed me because I will publicly stand up for our police. And I will never say, like she has said, that blue lives don't exist.
Here. Would you care to respond to that last allegation?
Sure. I'm the daughter and granddaughter and cousin of first responder. I'm a friend of first responders. I am a supporter of our law enforcement, and it's disingenuous to accuse me of thinking otherwise. I worried every day when my brother was inner city Boston EMT and had to go out into the field wearing a bulletproof vest. I worry every day about my cousin, who's the first woman sheriff of Salt Lake County, Utah, and I worry about our law enforcement in our community. I'm not endorsed by FOP and WACOPS. That's true. That's fact that you can research, but that doesn't mean I'm any less committed to ensuring that our community is safe, that law enforcement have the tools that they need, including more mental health support, which they are clamoring for, to keep our neighbors safe and to prevent crime, not only respond to it.
All right, we are going to talk about democracy next, but I'm going to make a real quick statement. We are having fun, I can tell. Very obvious out there. What I will ask, though, however, is we've had a few instances where people have started clapping during someone's talk. And so I would appreciate it if we just let them make the statement. It's only 60 seconds you have to wait. And also, like Elizabeth had pointed out when we started, only clapping. Let's not be yelling. Let's not be whooping. Let them talk. Just let them hear. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Democracy was number 3. And I'm just going to say personally, when it came up in the committee, everyone kind of looked at each other and goes, wow, this is big. What do you mean by democracy? So it was a little hard, and we had to work on it to find a place where there was something we felt like we could talk about. Respondents selected democracy in the survey. So that's an issue that also an issue goes well beyond one legislative district. So our group, when we centered and kind of settled into something, we talked about the idea of preserving democracy in the sense of civility, trust in government, and balancing rights and responsibilities. The first question goes to Senator Randall. The intersection of democracy and individuals often crystallizes in the problem of public health policy. A refrain that seems to be on the mind of many people in this 27th legislative district is the issue of rights through my body, my choice. However, this means different things to different people in our district and on our committee. On one hand, this looks like Governor Jay Inslee's state of emergency order in 2020 that enabled as many as 85 specific safety protocols to the COVID pandemic, like mask mandates or vaccine requirements for state employees. On the other hand, my choice harkens back to the Roe versus Wade decision that was overturned earlier this year, putting reproductive rights back into the hands of the states. What responsibility does the state legislature have in regulating the health decisions of citizens?
Thank you for that question. I know it's on all of our neighbors' minds. I knock on doors every day, have had over 2,000 live conversations with neighbors, and almost every other one is about reproductive rights and freedom. And the fear that with the federal Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe, that we will lose that freedom to choose what's right for us and our families here in Washington, even though twice at the ballot box, voters have voted to codify Roe and to ensure that our right to abortion is protected here. I think it's pivotal that we continue to have a legal landscape that protects individual freedom to choose to access abortion. No matter what the our federal government tries to do, no matter what majorities are in office, we need to protect the sanctity and sovereignty of our individual bodies.
Representative Young.
Individual liberty is the foundation of our republic, our democratic republic. And anybody's version of democracy should always boil down to individual rights. I'm proud to have consistently carved out a reputation voting against my majority party a number of times. Again, statistically, the highest in the legislature, joining with Democrats to stand up for individual liberty, because that's the core thing that we swear an oath to do. When it comes to the dichotomy that you're seeing between one issue that dealt with the Dobbs decision and then another with the governor's orders that not only took away that individual right, but then ripped families apart when they wanted to take care of their loved ones during the COVID crisis. He took away those individual rights, and Senator Randall voted to remove legislative oversight. That's why we haven't had any for the past 2 years. I will never do that. I will always stand for individual liberty.
Let me stay on this one for just 1 second, because it was a complicated question. I admit that, because it gave you two ways to take it, 2 ways to tread the road. We'll come back to Senator Randall, and you spoke about abortion rights in your intro. Talk about the second part of the question with what he's saying. The governor put down a lot of safety precautions, and we kept them longer than almost any other state. How did you feel about that sitting in the legislature?
Yeah, I think ensuring that our community is safe and healthy definitely has to be on the forefront of all legislators' minds. But I also sponsored legislation to bring checks and balances on the governor's emergency power in line with what many other states have. We passed it through the Senate, but through for a number of reasons, including the governor's strong opposition, the House killed the bill. And so we didn't get that across the finish line, but I will say that I have often taken a stand against the governor on a number of issues. But what I also want to say, because Representative Young brought up ensuring that families can take care, or the individuals can take care of their families, and that he stands up for individual liberty. He has introduced legislation to make abortion a felony, and he did not vote for paid family medical leave, which is what allowed so many of our neighbors to take care of their loved ones during the pandemic.
Well, I was going to ask for the topic of the 2 that you didn't choose, and then she brought up a bill that you've apparently sponsored. Do you want to explain that?
The bill that I have sponsored bans late term and post-birth abortions. That's the bill that I wrote this year. It's House Bill 2121. It's disingenuous to claim that it does something that it doesn't do. I wrote that bill because I support life. I believe in giving all life a chance to live. I also believe in being consistent for the support of individual liberty, but to claim that my bill would somehow stop anything prior to 15 weeks and somehow would be anti anything with regard to rape or incest is disingenuous. And more importantly, it's dividing our country. We used to be able to disagree or agree to disagree on being pro-life or pro-choice. My bill protects against the selling of baby parts, post-term abortion, half delivering a baby, and she supports those. There's a big difference between the 2 of us.
I would like to give you a chance to say what exactly you support.
Sure. I support the right for an individual to choose abortion when it is the right choice for them. I believe that Roe should continue to be the law, that Washington state's protection should continue to exist. And while Representative Young did introduce that version of the bill this year, he has been in office for many years and has his name on many abortion bans, including a full-scale abortion ban that makes access to abortion a felony.
Has your position changed on that over time? Or what is, explain the difference?
Well, I support life, but the reason why I wrote the bill that I wrote, as opposed to these other bills, was because prior to these sessions, we couldn't even get any type of hearing whatsoever for moving money out of Planned Parenthood that was forcing abortions on people and not providing them any type of care for mastectomies, for any type of other women's health bills. And we were trying to make those budgetary moves. She's taking previous bills that I did not write, I co-sponsored, for the sake of standing up for life. The bill that I write, I stand behind, House Bill 2121. Look at the bill and see that it doesn't do what she claims that it does.
Okay, thank you. Question 2 Question 2 under our democracy heading. We'll start with Representative Young this time. How we talk about politics or cultural issues is often described as civility, and the general negative sense of campaigning or social media fighting that often gives us an impression that civility is in decline. How do you personally see your role as a leader? You're helping people in the 26th district to connect over shared interests. And what's one specific position you can agree on with your opponent or their party in the sense of working collaboratively on solutions?
Well, that's a great question. That's why I'm proud to have so many unanimously supported bills and that have been bipartisanly co-sponsored with Democrats. I've worked hard to keep that promise that I made when I came into office, that I would work across the aisle. 2 of those victories that we just had this session dealt with mental health. Senator Randall brought up mental health just a moment ago. The bill that I bipartisanly wrote and co-sponsored with Democrats that was unanimously passed led to the greatest release of mental health dollars into this district that we've seen in over a decade. I'm proud to have delivered that for you. The second thing that we can work on that was bipartisanly co-sponsored and unanimously passed was a bill to provide greater healthcare options to our veteran community. That has been underserved. This is a veteran serving district. I pledge to stand up for veteran rights. I've delivered on that time and again. I have many more bills that I've co-sponsored with Democrats to bring veterans, additional rights for veterans, especially with post-traumatic stress disorder and other things. But I'm proud of that bill that we got unanimously passed that dealt with giving them greater options.
Senator Randall.
Thank you. I think it's clear that our neighbors want reasonable, rational, calm elected officials who are going to go down to Olympia and work on solutions. Work with anybody who's willing to work on solutions. I am proud to have worked across the aisle on a number of policy areas, including with Republican Senate Minority Leader John Braun on disability rights issues. We have worked together to finally make some progress in what's called the no paid services caseload. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of families who have children with disabilities who are waiting to find support and who haven't gotten support because the state hasn't fully funded these supports. It affects not only children, but also adult children and their aging parent caregivers. And it's personal to me, and that's why I'm so glad to go down and work in Olympia with colleagues of all parties who are willing to solve problems.
All right, we are getting close to the end here and I'm running out of time. This has gone quickly. The 4th issue that was named in the surveys was the environment. And it's no surprise that in our beautiful state of Washington, the environment was one of the top concerns for respondents in our legislative district. As one of the nation's innovators in renewable energy and climate preparedness, Washington's environmental leadership is a continued concern for citizens. So question number 1, which we'll start with Senator Randall. Over the summer, Governor Inslee announced his intention to ban the sale of new gas-powered vehicles by 2035, which he described as a climate-related goal, following up on the 2022 legislative goal of phasing them out by 2030. Do you support the efforts to phase out gas-powered vehicle emissions entirely? And whether you do or not, should the legislature still respond to the increase in electric vehicles and the need for infrastructure to accommodate a growing choice consumers are making?
So I think it is our responsibility to plan for the future. That is a key role of the legislature. Now, I'll just admit, I drive a 1997 Ford Ranger pickup truck that is gas powered and uses a lot of gas. And, you know, I would love an electric or more fuel efficient vehicle, but that's the vehicle that my family could afford when, you know, we moved home to Washington. And I think that's true for so many of our neighbors. I talk to neighbors all the time who would like to have an electric vehicle, but can't afford it at the current prices, and who are making decisions about how to do the work of being good stewards of the earth and protecting our environment, but also doing it within the confines of their budget. Now, I think 1, that the governor's goal is a goal, and 2, that if we are going to work towards environment where we are relying on electric cars or like the hydrogen fuel cell car that I got to test drive the other day, then we do need to focus on infrastructure and not just charging facilities, but also a more resilient grid to handle the toll that it will take.
Representative Young.
Well, it looks like Senator Randall and I agree on two things. First off, we agree that driving Fords is a good thing. Number one. Number two, I also appreciate her comment on the grid. It's unfortunate that her party and she apparently support removing our Snake River dams.
I'm going to hold you. We're going to talk about that next if you want to.
When it comes to the gas-powered vehicles, I'm proud to have led on that. Many of you have heard me talk about before that the governor's Keystone policy was a bill that I bipartisanly wrote with Democrat Representative Peterson to build out all of the electrical grid infrastructure in the state. And I did that without raising your taxes because there's a right way and there's a wrong way to do that. Senator Randall continues supporting subsidies and bans that affect you and drive up your costs. I prefer free market solutions that do that, that don't add to your tax burden. That's the first policy. The second thing is that with that ban comes a shift in taxing policy to a road user charge, which they support adding a GPS car tracking tax to your cars. I have written the constitutional amendments to ban any form of GPS tracking on how you drive.
I am glad you brought that up. And we're going to keep it quick because we want to do the last question. But I think that's a really good point. Whether you like electric vehicles or not, gas tax goes away. Even if we don't mandate it, it's going to change. So we'll start with you. Each 45 seconds on how, what do we do? What is the method if we're going to lose gas tax as we go into the future? Gas tax or revenue, excuse me.
Yeah, and I'll say we're already there. Gas tax revenue is already declining dramatically, and it's already impacting what the state's transportation budget is able to fund. We have been underfunding road maintenance and preservation for far too long. Roads in our region, but also in Eastern Washington, are really struggling because of that. We do need to come up with what a better solution is for funding our transportation infrastructure. Right now, we are at the final stages of a road usage charge pilot, which had multiple different methods that folks could opt into to track. One was a GPS, one was reporting your mileage prospectively, one was reporting your mileage after you've driven it. And I think we'll have more discussions about whether any of those three are the right option or not.
Representative, and I would, since you made the point about not choosing something that's GPS based or tracking based, is there one of those options that is palatable to you?
Well, I appreciate the commentary about the pilot because I was one of the legislators that was asked to specifically provide my insight as a technology professional on that. Yes, you can do pictures. What I prefer and what the pilot is starting to show is that with the distribution of technology into every one of your hands, specifically your phones and your smart apps, we have the ability to provide for you to take snapshots of your odometer, sync that into your newer cars so that we can track the delta between where you started and where you ended, and do it with a mechanism that will not track where you drive and the location of where you are. That's why I wrote the amendment, or the constitutional amendments to ban that, so that we can have the technology availability of that implementation, but not infringe on anybody's individual liberty.
All right. All right. We're going to end this on time. I'm going to make sure. Because me and this guy and this guy and this guy have been standing the whole time. All right. Last environmental question. We'll start with Representative Young. A second question related to emissions and energy is the state's historical reliance on hydroelectric power and its usefulness as the state makes steps to lessen dependence on fossil fuels. Are you in favor of preserving hydroelectric sources of energy for Washington utilities, such as the 4 lower Snake River dams? And how would you balance that with environmental concerns that affect Puget Sound's health in terms of issues like preserving threatened salmon runs?
So I have actually been at the forefront of this for you. I've been on the energy committees that have looked at this. I've been back to DC representing you with my experience. And I can tell you there's only one regional grid in the country that is actually ahead of the curve, and it's ours. It's ours, not only in terms of being clean, it's ours in terms of energy production and keeping rates low for those that need to be able to heat their winter or heat their homes in the winter without spending all their money on it. And if we were to get rid of the Snake River dams, if we were to address or try to attack our hydroelectric capacity, we would undermine any ability for us to proactively pursue other areas of technology to increase energy production, because we would tank our grid. Senator Randall says she wants a strong grid. I agree with her on that. We need a strong grid. But if you remove those dams and you undercut our hydroelectric capacity, you're not only hurting the entire West Coast, because California buys a lot of our energy just to keep the lights on. You're dooming the low and middle class into skyrocketing 60%, 80%. Senator Randall and I have been in meetings with our energy companies here locally saying 60% increases in the cost to heat and cool your home. And we cannot put that on the citizens of the state. Thank you.
Senator Randall.
You know, I'm glad to be ending on a question where we're closely aligned and not throwing things at each other. You know, I think it's true. Our grid needs more investments to be resilient, to ensure that we're able to keep low rates, to make sure that we can keep the lights on, we don't have rolling brownouts. And it is true that because of our, you know, the amount of our power that comes from Bonneville Power Authority, it comes from hydropower, our power is cleaner, more affordable, and more reliant than so many other places. I think we also need to be investing in transitional energy solutions. We need to continue innovating. That's why I love to work on higher education policy and invest in the students who are coming up with fantastic new ideas about how to make our grid more resilient, how to transition to cleaner power, different power options that don't have an impact on our salmon and streams. I think that's work that we're going to continue.
Let's one more follow-up. I'm going to fit one in here. Touch the second half of the question that says, you both really talked about the dams and the energy part. The second half of it is science says these affect salmon runs. And so what should the state be doing? Maybe it's not dams, maybe it's something else, but we need to be preserving and putting and investing into those. How do you approach that question?
We have both seen studies that show the technology advancements, and not only in terms of fish ladders, but other alternatives to protect our salmon runs that are also supported by our tribal community members that also have a stake in this game. That technology is there, and that's where we should invest in so that we can protect our salmon runs, keep our grid strong with the hydroelectric, and from that position of strength that not only protects our environment, but keeps costs low, then we start to invest. That's the right way to do it so that we cause no harm while we seek to improve our future.
How fast does that have to happen?
How fast does that have to happen?
Yeah, I mean, because it's a perfect answer, but there's a time window, right?
I would vote to immediately start line item money into the construction of those ladders and that technology so that the dam question goes away, so nobody has to fear that the hydroelectric would be under attack.
So I am interested and open to solutions to make our dams more resilient and salmon friendly. I also think that we need to be focusing on additional tools for salmon and ecosystem health. We have invested record dollars in kelp forests and eelgrass meadows. We need to look at whole watershed system to fish passage barrier, you know, the culverts and the roads that we're looking at. We're funding the state funded ones, but there are county and city owned culverts that also need attention. We have to be investing in our salmon. They're, you know, a canary in our ecosystem's coal mine. And if we're not ensuring that our environment is resilient and cared for the next generations and the next generations, then we have a lot less hope.
All right. We made it here. 60 seconds with a closing statement. Anything that I didn't ask about, or if you just want to remind me why I should vote for you. We're going to start with Senator Randall on this one.
Thank you so much for being here and for participating, and David for asking such thoughtful questions, and for the individuals who participated in coming up with the questions. You know, elections are about choices. They're about who aligns with your values, who you think will make the right decisions for our community. Now, I'm the only pro-choice candidate in the race, and I will fight to ensure that our freedom to choose abortion is protected. I have worked to expand access to democracy, to create more ballot box access, to pay postage on mail-in ballots. And Representative Young has co-sponsored, at the very least, legislation to repeal mail-in voting and flew to Arizona to take part in the audit. I will work hard to listen to our neighbors' needs and to fight for the solutions that you care about, to fight to expand affordable healthcare, to fight to expand investments in our schools and our communities and our environment. And it will be up to you to decide which of us you want to represent you.
Thank you all for coming. I do agree with Senator Randall. This election is about choices. And if we could distill that down, maybe the best way to distill it would be this is an election about choosing between hope and fear. You shouldn't have to fear when your spouse goes to the store to buy groceries. You shouldn't have to fear that your child might not be safe when they wait at the school bus stop in the morning. As I've knocked on over 40,000 doors this election cycle, I have never seen the ominous cloud of fear hover over the constituents that I've been elected to serve. I'm choosing now to run the Senate and take a step out of my House seat that by all means was considered safe, because I want to fight to reinstill hope into your future. Re-establish the hope that we grew up on, that was passed down to us, so that we can then pass it down in turn to our kids and make sure that they can hope for and have someday the joyous laughter of a greater future. That's why I'm running for Senate, and I'd ask for your vote. Thank you.
Is this because I turned around? Thank you all. Thank you for coming so much. Again, thanks to the two behind me for taking part in this on this afternoon. We want to hear your feelings about the debate, and we ask that you use the QR code. You have the QR codes right here. Your input helps us better serve more communities and bringing folks together about the issues that matter most to them. Braver Angels wants to continue doing this. They want to continue doing it with a collaboration of Republicans and Democrats, making questions that are relevant